What is simulation theory? Where did it come from? This notion, this idea that we live in a simulation and that our reality is nothing more than a computer-generated illusion. What does this theory suggest? Where did it originate from? And does it hold merit? What is the likelihood that we are living in a simulation and that everything we know is merely an illusion, merely a computer-generated construct, ourselves included? Today we will be exploring this theory, everything that surrounds it, and decide for ourselves what the likelihood of this is. In a seminal 2003 paper titled, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom explained that future generations might have megacomputers that can run numerous and detailed simulations of their forebears, aka ancestor simulations, in which the simulated beings are imbued with a sort of artificial consciousness. Then it could be the case, he explained, that the vast majority of minds like ours do not belong to the original race, but rather to people simulated by the advanced descendants of an original race. It is then possible to argue, if this were the case, we would be rational to think that we are likely among the simulated minds rather than among the original biological ones. That type of post-human simulator would need sufficient computing power to keep track of the detailed belief states in all human brains at all times. Why? Because it would essentially need to sense observations of birds, cars, etc. before they happened, and provide simulated detail of whatever was about to be observed. In the event of a simulation breakdown, the director, whether teenager or giant-headed alien, could simply edit the states of any brains that have become aware of an anomaly before it spoils the simulation. Alternatively, the director could skip back a few seconds and rerun the simulation in a way that would avoid the problem. We're likely not there yet, but Verk thinks we will be at some point. There are 10 checkpoints on the road to full-blown simulation, and we're nearly halfway there to our destination. But there are also major barriers ahead, namely that what are called brain-computer interfaces. However, those don't exist just yet. In an interview with podcaster Joe Rogan, Elon Musk said, "If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then games will be indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will end. One of those two things will occur. Therefore, we are most likely in a simulation because we exist." He went on, "I think most likely this is just about probability. There are many, many simulations. You might as well call them reality, or you could call them multiverse." What artificial intelligence is to dystopian blockbuster The Terminator, simulation theory is to the Wachowski siblings sci-fi thriller which depicts a post-apocalyptic world in which Most of humanity have been captured by a race of machines that live off of the human's body heat and electrochemical energy, and who imprison their minds within an artificial reality known as the Matrix. In the film, humans go about their everyday lives, and they don't realize they're actually living in a simulation because a cable plugged into their neocortexes beamed signals into their brains and read their reactions. One way to achieve that, or something like it in the real world, would be to gain a greater understanding of human consciousness and how it works so we can produce conscious AI. The far less technical alternative is tricking our consciousness into thinking that we are in reality when we are in a video game in which non-player characters exhibit intelligent human-like behavior that passes the Turing test. This is something that is coming. Preston Green, a philosopher, professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, built in that he thinks he could be living in a simulation right now. But proving as much, he is warned, and some have attempted, would be catastrophic. Just as present-day researchers use simulations to digitally create scenarios to aid scientific study. Example, what would happen if we were to eliminate mosquitoes? Our world, and every moment of our past existence, might be the simulated experience of future humans. And just as scientists can terminate simulations of earthquakes, weather, etc., when they no longer provide useful data, so too our hypothetical overlords can pull the plug at any time without warning. But rest assured, Green said, it would be a quick and painless death. If our physicists use experiments to prove we live in a simulation, and they tell everyone about this, and that has a large effect on how our civilization behaves, then our simulation would no longer be useful for answering questions about the basement level of reality, which contains the computers doing the simulations. This is because such experimental proofs could never happen on the basement level. So even though there are many possibilities for how our simulators would react to our using experiments to prove we live in a simulation, simulation shutdown is worth taking at least as seriously as anything else, since it is supported by observed trends in simulation science. Like any outside-the-box notion, simulation hypothesis has plenty of skeptics. In 2006, during the 17th annual Isaac Asimov panel debate at New York's American Museum of Natural History, the topic was discussed by a panel of August experts that included Chalmers astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson, University of Maryland physics professor Zohre Duvati, and Harvard University physicist Lisa Randall. Randall, it quickly became apparent, was the group's most definitive doubter. Although she allowed for the possibility that nothing is what it seems, including the cognitive process of observation, she also wondered about the judgment of our supposed simulators in choosing mankind for their grand experiment. It's just not based on well-defined probabilities, she said. The argument says you'd have lots of things that want to simulate us. I actually have a problem with that. We mostly are interested in ourselves. Why simulate us? I mean, there's so many things to be simulating. I don't know why this higher species would want to bother with us. It was widely thought, the simulation hypothesis has been disproven once and for all when in 2017, physicists Zohar Ringel and Dmitry Kovrishi published an article in the journal Science Advances titled Quantized Gravitational Responses, the Sign Problem, and Quantum Complexity. Here's the catch. Their works was at most indirectly relevant to simulation, which Zohar later dismissed as not even a scientific question. Specifically, they proved that a classical computing technique called quantum Monte Carlo, which is used to simulate quantum particles like photons, electrons, and other types of particles that comprise the universe, was insufficient to simulate a quantum computer itself, a breakdown that would negate the need to physically build these next-level machines, which is no easy task. And if it's impossible to simulate a quantum computer, forget about simulating the universe. From Cosmos.com, the researchers calculated that just storing information about a couple hundred electrons would require a computer memory that would physically require more atoms than exists in the universe. Nonetheless, Ringel, the paper's lead author, appeared to leave the door ever so slightly cracked when he told Popular Mechanics, who knows what are the computing capabilities of whatever simulates us? The real question is, what are the limits of computing powers? In other words, echoing Bostrom and Green, some advanced species could possess a system that makes even the world's fastest supercomputers seem like Commodore 64s. Maybe they've perfected quantum computing, or maybe it's something else entirely, something of which our limited minds can't even conceive. Calling simulation theory a bit flaky, but a fascinating idea, UK astronomer Martin Rees nonetheless remained curious about the idea in an interview with Space.com. The real question, he said, is what are the limits of computing powers? Or are there limits? Judging by the types of real-world simulations scientists can now run on supercomputers, what might they be able to run in the coming decades or centuries, as processing power achieves levels we currently can't fathom? Cosmologist Paul Davies has over the years shared many deep thoughts on this monumentally complex topic, and apparently is still being asked to impart them. I have suddenly been deluged with media queries about the simulation argument, he told Bilton via email. Don't know why. Davies has spoken so much on the subject that he preferred to let his past ruminations, including the recent one, do the talking. Even as far back as in 2003, in a story for The Guardian, Davies was posing brain-boggling simulation scenarios. Here is part of what he wrote. Mathematicians have proved that a universal computing machine can create an artificial world that is in itself capable of simulating its own world. And so on, ad infinitum. In other words, simulations nest inside simulations inside simulations. Because fake worlds can outnumber real ones without restriction, the real multiverse would inevitably spawn a vastly greater number of virtual multiverses. Indeed, there would be a limitless tower of virtual multiverses, leaving the real one swamped in a sea of fakes. So the bottom line is this: once we go far enough down the multiverse route, all bets are off. Reality goes into the melting pot, and there is no reason to believe we are living in anything but a Matrix-style simulation. Science is then reduced to a charade because the simulations of our world, whoever or whatever they are, can create any pseudo laws they please and keep changing them. So, simulation or no simulation, who really cares? Then again, you might be wondering, why does any of this matter? What is the purpose of proving or disproving that life as we know it is merely a digital construct, and existence simply an immensely complex experiment in someone's virtual terrarium? The broad answer is that which all good science pursues: truth. More specifically, our truth. If we do in fact exist inside a video game that requires our characters, us, to perform certain quests and achievements in order to progress and level up, wouldn't it be useful to know what kind of game we're in so as to increase our chances of surviving and thriving? I think it would make all the difference in the world, whatever type of world it is. And that is everything that we currently know about simulation theory. This is one of the more sensational theories, something that in reality has no scientific evidence whatsoever, but is loosely connected to concepts that do have some sort of basis in reality. We do simulate real life events virtually. So, this idea that we exist in a virtual matrix, while is not something that we can prove, it is something that, nonetheless, we should not dismiss as a collective. Plus, there's nothing wrong with having a little fun with this kind of theory. And as many scientists have mentioned, why wouldn't we want to know the truth? It's something that we should all think about, because if we learn the truth, it will change the very nature of our reality. We will stop operating within the context of there is a universe with predefined laws, and start operating within the context of there is a virtual world, and any law can change at any time. There are no rules except the ones that are defined by the simulators, which can change at any time. The rules of the game can constantly change because it is a simulation. It is not reality. And then we can accept ourselves for what we are, which is merely artificial intelligence in an artificial world. Hopefully, that is not the case, and we are living, breathing, sentient, organic life forms. But then again, we'll probably never really know. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Let's Learn ASMR. And, as always, I will see you in the next video. Good night.